This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're spending the hour talking about the CIA. John Rizzo is with us in Washington, D.C., retired CIA attorney, served as the agency's acting general counsel during most of the Bush administration. He's just written a book called Company Man, 30 Years of Controversy and Crisis in the CIA. And Scott Horton is with us, longtime human rights attorney and contributing editor at Harper's Magazine, also lecturer at Columbia University Law School, and author of a forthcoming book called The Lords of Secrecy, the National Security Elite and America's Stealth Foreign Policy. Juan?
Well, John Rizzo, before the break, you were mentioning that there's a periodic crises that erupted in with the CIA's activities, and you were early in your career, as you say in your book, involved in one of the great constitutional crises, the Iran-Contra. You talk about how former CIA Director William Casey asked you at one point to provide the most expansive finding you could to allow the U.S. government to continue to back the particular sides that the Reagan administration then was supporting in Central America, the Guatemalan government against its leftist rebels, the Nicaraguan Contras. Could you talk about that, the finding then, and in retrospect, because that turned out to be a huge battle between Congress and the administration and the CIA over foreign policy?
Sure, Juan. Yeah, the Iran-Contra scandal occurred about 10 years into my career, and it was basically, looking back, the turning point of my career, because it was my first opportunity to have a front row seat and participate firsthand in a major confrontation and investigation between CIA and the Congress. And it, as you indicated, CIA Director at the time, William Casey, was a very forceful, very aggressive advocate, anti-communist advocate. And he directed me to, and I was not a senior attorney at the time, but he directed me, since I was the lawyer for the clandestine service, to draft authorizations for President Reagan to sign that were, to my experience to date, very aggressive. It was as you indicated, the Central America, the Contra crusades. It was the covert actions against the support to Mujahideen, against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So it was rather breathtaking, and of course, the Iran-Contra scandal erupted because of CIA's pursuant to White House direction, Oliver North, William Casey and Oliver North concocted a scheme to basically trade U.S. arms for hostages that the Iranian-backed Hezbollah was holding, and divert those proceeds unlawfully to the Nicaraguan Contras. So it was a huge uproar, and there was a special congressional committee created. And as I say, it was a template for a number of clashes between CIA and Congress over the years. I mean, honestly, this current contretemps, of course, I've been away 5 years now, so all I know, I don't have any inside information, but it really strikes me as something, as the kind of clash over Congressional Committee access to documents that I saw a number of times in my career, and frankly, I'm a bit flummoxed as to how it escalated, how this current thing has escalated the way it has.
Scott Horton, you are familiar with the Iran-Contra scandal and the constitutional crisis that developed then. Could you talk about your perspective on it?
Well, I think John used the word resilient right at the outset. And, that's clearly right. That's one of the things I think I found most remarkable in his book. We've been told that things like the Church Committee and the Iran-Contra probes clipped the wings of the CIA, left it weak and unwilling to go out and do its work. I never had the impression that that was true. And I think one of the things that emerges from John's book is, in fact, how little impact these things had on the agency and its operations, which continued to be very, very aggressive. And I think also the relationship with the White House was stressed there historically. It comes through very, very clearly. And, that may in the end raise this fundamental question of how effective has congressional oversight ever been. Certainly even in periods when there was a sharp clash in approach and views on policy between congressional overseers and the CIA, it seems it's only very, very rarely that congressional oversight has been able to move or slow down the CIA in any way. And, that carries forward to the current controversy with this new report on torture and the way this has been slow-walked. I mean, really, it's an amazing amount of time it's taken to get it out. And we see the eruption of this final amazing controversy over documents which are claimed to have disappeared. But in any event, it's bizarre that there could be such a controversy, because the whole function of oversight involves having access to and reviewing these documents. So the suggestion that that members of Congress, members of the Oversight Committee, could have done something wrong by reviewing documents which it is their responsibility to review is just bizarre.
Well, let's talk about some concrete examples of the issues that are being looked at now. I want to ask about extraordinary rendition in the case of Khaled al-Masri, the German citizen who sued the CIA for illegally kidnapping him in Macedonia in 2003. After accusing him of being a member of al-Qaeda, the CIA flew him to a secret prison in Afghanistan and held him for 5 years. He was only released for 5 months. He was only released after the CIA realized they had detained the wrong man and left him alone on an abandoned road in Albania. While in CIA custody, al-Masri says he was repeatedly beaten, drugged, roughly interrogated by masked men, detained in squalid conditions, and denied access to an attorney or his family. This is Khaled al-Masri.
They took me to this room, and I had handcuffs, and I had a blindfold, and when the door was closed, I was beaten from all sides. I was hit from all sides. I then was humiliated. And then I could hear just like that I could hear that I was being photographed in the process when I was completely naked. Then my hands were tied on my back, to my back. I got a blindfold, and they put chains to my ankles and a sack over my head. And just like the pictures we have seen from Guantanamo, for example, I was dragged brutally into the airplane, and in the airport, I was thrown to the floor. I was tied to the floor into the sides of the airplane. At some point, when I woke up again, I found myself in Afghanistan. I was brutally dragged off the airplane and put in the trunk of a car. I was thrown into the trunk of a car.
John Rizzo, talk about Khaled al-Masri and this case.
Well, unfortunately, I hate to do this, but the al-Masri case, the U.S. government still considers that whole episode to be classified. So I'm constrained about talking about it in any detail. You may notice I didn't talk about it in the book. Let me just briefly say about renditions. Yeah, CIA did conduct some renditions in the post-9/11 era. Some, not the. It's been alleged that there were dozens or even hundreds. But yes, CIA did conduct renditions. Renditions, however, actually go back through several administrations. It wasn't this term extraordinary rendition I always found puzzling, because renditions were not a product of the post-9/11 era, and in fact the Obama administration carefully preserved its authority. At the same time, when it closed the interrogation program, it carefully preserved its authority to conduct renditions. So renditions in and of themselves are actually a fairly well-established fact in American and world, actually, intelligence organizations.
Do you think it's fair to call it kidnapping?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a euphemism. I mean, it's taking someone against their will. You know, it's an authorized government program. But if the term kidnapping means, you know, taking someone who doesn't want to be taken and taking him somewhere else, then I suppose one could you know, euphemistically describe it that way.
Scott Horton, talk about this case.
Well, I think the Khalid al-Masri case is really significant for a number of different reasons. The first is, well, no, you know, John can't talk about it because it's still classified. It's secret. And so this is one of several cases where we see secrecy being invoked and used to cover up mistakes. Because Khalid al-Masri has a name very similar to someone who was a serious al-Qaeda terrorist. And he was mistaken for that individual. And he was picked up, brutalized, tortured, and imprisoned because of that mistake. That's something that in a democratic society, you know, we should be able to talk about and discuss, and we should be able to have government accountability and closure on these issues, but secrecy is used effectively to block that. The next major issue concerning al-Masri is the fact that this is a case that went to the highest court in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. They handed down a very important decision, landmark decision, what's now viewed as perhaps their most important single judgment dealing with the torture issue. And in that decision, they concluded that the procedures that were used, that you heard Mr. al-Masri himself describe in the outtake here, did constitute torture. And they also said that the government of Macedonia had failed in its legal responsibilities by not opening a criminal inquiry and prosecuting those who were involved. And those who were involved were, by and large, CIA agents. I mean, not just any CIA agents. It included, as the Associated Press subsequently disclosed, a very, very senior CIA functionary who directed the entire thing, who subsequently went on to be the head of the Global Jihad Unit, has been a briefer in the White House, and so forth. The CIA insists we shouldn't use her name, although it's very, very well known. You know, I think a hugely significant event, hugely embarrassing, but it's something, frankly, it would behoove the United States and the CIA to just come clean about.
And it's not just a mistake about the kidnapping. He lived to tell about what was done to him.
That's exactly correct. And I mean, not only that, but he became the subject of a criminal investigation in Germany. I at one point went and interviewed some of the criminal investigators in Munich who had worked on his case, and they said, look, you know, he gave an account, and we were able to absolutely verify his account about what was done to him, including the use of psychotropic drugs and so forth, all of which has come out. They were able to make their conclusions by examining his body, by cutting his hair, dealing with hair samples and so forth. So we know from that some of the things that were done to him in his captivity, both in Macedonia and Afghanistan, and they raised very, very serious issues of violation of the law, even if he were a terrorist. But of course, he was just a simple German greengrocer, you know, and for him to have been subjected to this sort of abuse is horrible.
So the White House just said they did it to the wrong man.
John Russo, I want to ask you about one of the most infamous, I guess, of CIA renditions that took place in Milan, Italy, when a Muslim cleric named Abu Omar was snatched off the streets in 2003. Omar was taken to the U.S. bases in Italy and Germany before being sent to Egypt, where he says he was tortured. 22 CIA agents were later convicted in absentia in Italy for kidnapping. And last year, Sabrina De Souza, one of the CIA agents convicted in absentia, broke her silence and spoke to the McClatchy newspapers.
I don't think I could live with myself for the rest of my life knowing exactly what happened, and in particular knowing that the U.S. rendered an individual, Abu Omar, when they had no prosecutable evidence against him. And worse, after the rendition, it turned out there was a big misunderstanding between Cairo and Rome, because the Egyptians maintained that the only reason they issued an arrest warrant for him was at the behest of the Americans. After the rendition, Egypt came back and said, where's the information to prosecute him? And the CIA station chief Costelli said, I thought you had the information. And Rome said, and Cairo said, no, we don't. We issued this arrest warrant on your behalf. We don't. So where is the information? And that's why he was finally set free, because there was no prosecutable information, to get him convicted and put away.
Did Abu Omar pose an imminent and dangerous threat to American lives?
If he was dangerous and posed an imminent and clear danger, the DIGOS, the Italian police, would have picked him up right away. He was under investigation for 2 years, and pretty aggressive investigation on the part of DIGOS, and they found that his activities did not meet a threshold in Italy with which to prosecute him.
John Rizzo, I'm sure that was one case that you came across during your time at the CIA. What can you tell us about it?
I'm really sorry. I don't like this Stonewall, but again, that's a particular rendition that the U.S. government still considers classified. So, I mean, I'll say parenthetically, I agree with my friend Scott that that too many things remain classified for too long, and I would be happy to talk about either one of those cases, but with deep regret, my hands are tied on that.
I mean, what's interesting about this, it does go to the issue of classification. I mean, these CIA agents were tried in absentia. This is all brought out in a court. You have this CIA agent speaking about it publicly, and yet the CIA says you cannot talk about this.
Well, I'm afraid, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that, with what you described. I mean, I worked with Miss D'Souza. She was a fine officer, but in fact, she was that soundbite. She retired from the agency, but she was not given authorization to talk about the program, and neither am I.
Scott Horton, if you can tell us what exactly happened here. Clearly, she and the other agents cannot go to Europe as they were convicted in absentia.
Well, we had 26 people convicted. I mean, I think this is one of the things that demonstrates the huge risk of this program and the lack of just simple wisdom being applied in the selection of targets. I think to the extent this program was selected against people who really presented an imminent danger and were plotters of hijackings and things of that sort, I don't think it was going to raise that much of an issue in Europe or elsewhere. But to the extent it focused on people like Abu Omar or like Khalid al-Masri, it did, and it's very, very embarrassing. And in this case, we see 26 people being convicted.
So they kidnap him off the streets of Milan.
And he was taken to Aviano Air Base, involving an Air Force officer who then winds up also being charged at the outset. And he's taken to Ramstein in Germany, and then from there taken to Egypt. And I have to say, looking at in Egypt, he's held and he's interrogated for quite some time. The Egyptians come back ultimately saying, we don't get it. I mean, this guy really is not an important figure. He doesn't really have important information. Now, at this point, the embarrassment factor weighs in, and the CIA just wants him to be held. In fact, I've interviewed people in Cairo who've confirmed, they were put under intense pressure by the CIA to keep him quiet and to hold him there, basically because they were afraid of what he would come out and say. Well, this is nonsense again. And I think in the case of Italy, if we look back, there were people in the intelligence community who went to Ronald Reagan when the Achille Lauro incident occurred and said, let's just swoop in and grab one of the terrorists who's being held by the Italians. And Reagan said, we don't do that because that's going to damage our long-term relations with an important NATO ally. Reagan was absolutely right. And here I think you see what happens when you take the wrong course.
Well, John Rizzo, I wanted to ask you about one topic I think you can talk about. In 2010, in his first major interview since leaving office, former President George Bush admitted that he approved the waterboarding of prisoners. Bush's remarks came in an interview with NBC's Matt Lauer.
Why is waterboarding legal, in your opinion?
Because the lawyer said it was legal. It said it did not fall within the Anti-Torture Act. I'm not a lawyer, but you got to trust the judgment of people around you, and I do.
You say it's legal, and the lawyers told me.
Yeah. First of all, we used this technique on 3 people. Mm-hmm. Captured a lot of people and used it on 3. We gained valuable information to protect the country, and it was the right thing to do as far as I'm concerned.
So if it's legal, President Bush, then if an American is taken into custody in a foreign country, not necessarily a uniformed
Look,
American.
I'm not going to debate the issue, Matt.
I'm just asking, would it be okay for a foreign country to waterboard an American citizen?
All I ask is that people read the book, and they can reach the same conclusion if they'd have made the same decision I made or not.
You'd make the same decision again today?
Yeah, I would.
Well, John Rizzo, in your book, you don't recall the events quite the same way as President Bush recalled them.
Yeah, well, it's a rather curious episode. In his memoir, President Bush, claimed that he was involved in the interrogation program from the beginning, and in fact approved all the proposed techniques in advance. He talked about having vetoed a couple of them. And these are very vivid conversations he claimed to have had with George Tenet. This would be in the 2002-2003 timeframe. And I didn't, reading that, I didn't recall any of that. I dealt with George Tenet daily in those days. I mean, I was consumed with this program in the startup period, as was he. He had never told me about having talked to President Bush about this, what was then a new program, much less getting any guidance or directions from the president. So, I mean, and when the book came out, I actually reached out to George Tenet because I thought I'd missed something. I said, did you have these conversations with President Bush? And he said he had no recollection of having discussed the interrogation program with the president in those early days. So, I mean, frankly, I found the passage in President Bush's memoir bewildering.
And just mentioning that passage and decision points, he wrote, I took a look at the list of techniques. There were two that I felt went too far, even if they were legal. I directed the CIA not to use them. Bush went on to write, quote, Tenet asked if he had permission to use enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Damn right, I said. Scott Horton.
Well, George Bush, when he's asked why, he says the lawyers tell me it was legal. But of course, the Department of Justice is certainly one of the blackest chapters in the history of the Department of Justice, this whole affair. And when they go in and do their internal review, they say, we look at the two lawyers who were involved preparing these memoranda, and we're very concerned that the offer of preferment or advancement given to these lawyers, one was offered, had an appointment to the Court of Appeals dangled in front of him. The other was offered an assistant attorney general position, that this influenced and undermined their exercise of independent professional judgment. So I think it's a good demonstration of how power can corrupt and how lawyers not exercising independent professional judgment can lead to huge problems for the country down the road.
If Bush didn't authorize it, what does it mean?
In this case, I think there's no question but that responsibility rests ultimately with the president for this, whether he was specifically conscious of the individual techniques or participated in briefings or not. I think one thing that John Rizzo's book does really in spades is show how careful the CIA was going both to the Justice Department to get opinions, but then ultimately also to the White House, preparing this, briefing it in detail, getting consent. And when we see that the White House has withheld 9,000 pages of documents from the Senate Select Committee, I think this portrait that Rizzo provides gives us a very clear sense of what those documents are likely to be.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion. We're spending the hour with John Rizzo, retired CIA attorney, author of Company Man, 30 Years of Controversy and Crisis in the CIA, and Scott Horton, human rights attorney. When we come back, who should be held responsible for rendition, what all here agree is kidnapping, for torture? Should administration officials be brought to trial? This is Democracy Now!